listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. We are live. And when we're live, that means we take live guests. So our live guests are on their way. But while we're waiting for our live guest to arrive, I can't pass the opportunity to remind you that today is an extra special day for me. Because this is the anniversary of Publication Day. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Kamala, the Motherland, and Me. Remember, I published this book now 2 years ago. I can't believe time has come and gone like that. Kamala, the Motherland, and Me. It is a political memoir that I wrote about my trip to Africa, covering former Vice President Kamala Harris. We were in Ghana and Tanzania and Zambia. And I had the nerve to come back and tell the people, commit it to the page. And so if you haven't already, go out and pick up your copy of Kamala, the Motherland, and Me. It's a story that I think is timeless. And considering all the challenges that have been afoot in the world, particularly on the continent in recent years, it's required reading. All right. With that, I want to welcome my next guest, Dr. Berry. Are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. We are live here, and it is an honor to be in conversation with you. Let me just bring our leaders, learners, and listeners into the loop about who exactly you are. A physician who is board certified in internal, lifestyle, obesity, and culinary medicine, which honestly sounds like the degree, half of America needs their doctors to have at this point. He's the founder of Breaux Medical, a virtual first longevity practice, helping busy adults get ahead of chronic disease with clarity and, get this, even joy. He's also behind Longevity for the People, a health education series that's built to make proactive health real and accessible, and not just a luxury for folks with time and money to burn. And so please welcome Dr. Berry to the show. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Well, thank you for being here. You and I have talked about your work offline, but I want to bring our leaders, learners, and listeners into that conversation. Talk to us about the origin story of Longevity for the People.
Well, since I've started my own private practice, thinking about what is wrong with traditional practice and what is wrong with the longevity space, everything these days in the wellness space has become longevity. And I think people have a lot of misconceptions about what that means. But thinking about where we're falling short traditionally, we have an engagement problem. We're not getting people to come into the doctor to adopt healthy habits for various reasons. And on the longevity side, we have a trust problem and an exploitation problem, where without defining what we're talking about, people can fall for almost anything when it comes to, diagnosing a problem and selling you the solution without any real science or evidence behind it. So what I wanted to do was try to thread the needle between two extremes with Longevity for the People and really simplify what it means to be proactive and what it means to take ownership and agency in your health journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. And before I returned to this side of the microphone, you and I have talked about this. I worked in advocacy for some of the biggest organizations doing health justice related work, whether we're talking about young people or seniors. And so I've seen the challenges around longevity over the course of a lifespan. And obviously, this hits Black and brown communities the hardest. It hits the LGBTQ community as well. And any group that has challenges around, comorbidities, for example. And so, I'm really proud of the work that you're doing with Longevity for the People. As you and I have talked about, longevity's got to be more than just drinking your green juice and doing your crunches and doing your yoga. Talk to us about just sort of the everyday sort of culture change that you're seeing make a difference in the folks that you have the chance to engage with in your private practice, but also your public education initiative.
Yeah. So let me kind of frame it a little bit better than I did before. But Longevity for the People is a monthly in-person event that I host here in Oakland, California, where I live and where I grew up. And the idea is that health is personal, but health is also communal, right? And so health happens in community, in conversation, and it really starts with the mindset, right? And so what we talked about at our very first event earlier this year is how longevity is a mindset with a single core message. Your health has a trajectory, and you have the power to change it. From there, right? From there, you can start building on and layering on top of that what proactive health looks like day to day. So you mentioned crunches and green juice and all of that. So we talk about nutrition, we talk about movement, we talk about sleep, and we talk about stress and connection as sort of our 4 pillars of health. And we also talk about what we're trying to prevent, right? We talk about heart disease, cancer, dementia, diabetes, and all of its complications. And I try to do this in simplistic terms. So we got to get rid of the jargon and all the acronyms and the complicated, confusing messaging, and just bring it close to home and have a real conversation about what that looks like for you as an individual in your day-to-day life. So it really starts with the mindset, and then talking about what we're trying to prevent, how we're able to do that for the unique individual, and shift the motivation away from this fear of dying, which is sort of the traditional motivation. Like, you better do this or else, right? I think people are sort of tired of being spoken to that way. I better do this or else, 10, 20, 30 years from now, I might have something bad happen, which is true. I mean, I'm not saying those things aren't real, but it's shifting away from that, not completely, and toward the joy of living proactively, right? How can we find sustainable change in community, in our daily lives, in a way that's sustainable with clarity and joy?
I mean, I really love that. I really love that. I really love the way that you're thinking about this. I love the way that you're framing this. And I love how you're creating so many on-ramps, for people that don't necessarily think about their own longevity. People aren't walking around thinking about their lives necessarily in that way. People want to be around to see, their kids, have kids, right? They want to be around to be grandparents. They want to be around to be able to work live a softer life, not have to work so hard, to travel and enjoy themselves and enjoy a level of mobility well into their older years. Talk to us about that conversation that you've been having, particularly with older adults. There are a lot of folks that will do anything to protect their freedom, their autonomy. And we know that the relationship between that and their mobility are closely connected.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is increase our healthy years. So I say longevity is not about becoming immortal or optimizing every second of your life, but we do have to be mindful of silent risk factors and trajectory. And if you could be drifting in the wrong direction when it comes to metabolic health, but also physical, musculoskeletal health, as we talk about. And so, when we think about as we get older, frailty and mobility and physical independence become much more top of mind for people. And that's because the process of losing that physical independence has been going on quietly for decades. Whether it's our bone density or our muscle mass, or just our overall metabolism and mobility, those things tend to start declining at about age 30. We may not notice it right away, but slowly it does, move in that direction where you're losing muscle mass, you're losing bone density, unless you're training and keeping up with those things intentionally. And so, when you talk to people, how do you want to age? I want to age in place. I want to age independently. I want to be able to, play with my grandkids and teach them things and travel, and still, get the most out of life. And so the physical independence comes into play, usually top of mind for most people, which means we got to start early, right? Which means we need to start taking care of our bodies, as young folks, and find those sustainable habits, particularly around fitness, particularly around building muscle, particularly around, both cardio and strength, right?
Mhm.
Mobility and balance, and doing that in a way that's sustainable. And again, I always sort of go back to with joy, with clarity and intention, which often happens, in community. People often ask, well, why don't you just do this online? Why are you in person? Because that's limiting your audience. That's limiting, others' ability to join you. My answer to that is, because even if online is more efficient, in person is more effective
Yeah.
oftentimes, especially when it comes to community. And if you want to build sustainable change, form community around that change, form community around that habit, where you got to commit, you got to show up, you got to be held accountable to that community, but you also could find joy in that community, in that social interaction that we are often deprived of in this,
Yeah.
COVID, post-COVID era.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, look, that's what we're all about here on A More Perfect Union, is building a sense of community around the change that people say that they want, the change that they are demanding in their communities. I want to go back to your origin story, because as I hear the passion behind everything that you're sharing, the thoughtfulness around how you've put together longevity for the people, and how you approach medicine and healing. Uh, Share with us briefly your origin story that led you to this mission that we all get a chance to tap into.
So I grew up here in Oakland, and I was privileged and lucky to be exposed to many different things, many different walks of life. I went into medicine because I felt like that's where I could find alignment with what I was good at and what the world needed, and what I would stay passionate and engaged in for a career. I had exposure through my father, who was an ophthalmologist. I had exposure through my mother, who was a healthcare administrator. So that is my privilege in terms of my origin story, in terms of accessing a career in medicine. Once I got into medicine, I quickly sort of started to see how much of an industrial complex it truly is on both sides. And so, I've spent the past decade since finishing my training working in different systems, from academic hospital systems to a concierge, venture backed startup, and even in traditional large systems as a primary care physician. And one thing I'll tell you that I think most people can understand is that I was trying to practice relational care in a transactional system. You know,
Mm.
and it's one of those things where you have to decide if you're going to accept the system as is, or if you're going to try to change it from within, or if you're just going to leave entirely. And so, I don't bash the system as much as some folks do. I say it's a life-saving reactive system by design.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of sick people who need that system. It's where I come from. It doesn't do the proactive stuff very well. It just doesn't. We have an engagement problem. People don't want to go to the doctor. It's not fun. It's not a good experience. And so, but letting people slip through the cracks. So when it comes to proactive health, that starts at home. That starts at community. That starts in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
right? The reactive stuff often I saw happening too late in the clinic, or people walking in with things that we could have prevented, that we could have addressed earlier. So I felt like there was more alignment and motivation for me to go further upstream, to sort of to try to meet people where they were on the proactive side. And and thinking about healthcare, in my own private practice, you quickly realize money is a barrier, right? Money is a barrier, time is a barrier, and discipline can be a barrier, until you start working with folks. And so, as part of the mission of my life's work in medicine, I wanted to make sure that I could at least engage people on an educational front for free, which is fun for me. I mean, I'll talk about this stuff, all day, every day, and that to me is impact, right? That's the impact work that I wanted to do. That's the impact work that keeps me grounded, and it gives me a lot of feedback in terms of what's resonating and what's not. So
Yeah.
longevity for me came out of that type of experience for me.
No, I mean, I think that's terrific. And even as you shared that, I can't help but think about people like Marianne Williamson. She just popped into my head as you were talking, because I remember when she was running for president. And she said a lot of things when she was running for president. Obviously, she didn't get the Democratic nomination, but it doesn't mean that she didn't leave an impression. And one of the things that she said during one of the debates is that we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. And essentially, she's saying the same thing that you're saying, is that we're not investing enough in prevention. We are investing in healthcare after people get sick. We're not doing enough to prevent people from getting sick. And so I want to pick up on that thread when we come forward. I want you to stay with us, because there's a story right now in Ladera Ranch, an Orange County community, where families are demanding answers after multiple children have been diagnosed with exceptionally rare cancers. We're talking about various sarcomas, small round cell tumors, all over just the past couple years. We're talking amputations. We're talking a young woman who died in January, months after her college graduation. When we come forward, I want to talk about the role that environment can play in our opportunity for longevity, our opportunity to live long and prosper. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More with Dr. Barry, and Todd Belcore joins us when we come forward. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte. I'm really delighted to be in conversation with my next guest. We're now joined by six-time national award-winning lawyer, mediator, and law lecturer with over 20 years of experience serving communities on the ground. He's the executive director of Social Change, an organization that's using film and organizing and litigation and advocacy to dismantle what he and many others call the new Jim Crow. He teaches a class by the same name at Northwestern Law and at the University of Chicago. Welcome our More Perfect Union contributor, Todd Belcore. Todd, welcome.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you for the opportunity to join you, Dr. Breaux, as well. The work you're doing is incredible.
That's right. Dr. Breaux, for folks who are just joining us, he is a physician who is board certified in internal, lifestyle, obesity, and culinary medicine. He is the founder of Breaux Medical, a virtual first longevity practice, helping busy adults get ahead of chronic disease. And he is also the mastermind behind Longevity for the People. We love the work. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. An opportunity to be here.
And so before the break, I mentioned that there's this rare cancer cluster that's alarming Orange County families. There are a number of folks in Ladera Ranch, to be specific, that are demanding answers after multiple children have been diagnosed with an exceptionally rare cancer, a number of exceptionally rare cancers. Dr. Breaux, I want to start with you. I know that you have many specialties. Cancer is not one of them, but I think there's a direct link to this story and the role that environment can play when it comes to our pursuit of longevity.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the environmental risk factors to healthy life have often been neglected. We in Black and Brown communities, for decades, we have sounded the alarm on higher rates of pollution in our communities, leading to higher rates of asthma, chronic and other chronic respiratory disease. Just to name one that comes to mind. But I think environment has been neglected in general, where we have sort of assumed, based on short-term studies or based on sort of, theoretical mechanisms, that you introduce a new chemical or a pesticide or or a new material that, well, it so far so good. We'll just keep going with it, as opposed to taking a more sort of proactive and precautionary approach for more testing and ongoing surveillance. So I don't know the details, and exactly what's happening in this particular community, but it's certainly concerning and points to some environmental factors.
Todd, what are you seeing from a legal lens? What are you seeing in terms of the battle over environmental justice? This is an administration that came into power with a focus on deregulating. And we know that our communities have oftentimes had to bear the brunt of many of those regulations that have led to more pollution where we live, that's led to, negative health outcomes and more toxicity in the environments where our kids play and where we live and work.
Well, both of you doctors are right, unsurprisingly. I mean, at the end of the day, this whole process of rushing things to market, getting things out into the commonwealth and common spaces, and being actually just completely incorporated into the daily life of our communities has been hastened so incredibly under this administration that it's hard not to associate the lack of proper testing or sufficient testing or thorough testing with these abhorrent outcomes where people are you said just graduating from undergraduate and having to deal with amputations, and people who are dealing with these impossibly rare cancers all in one cluster. I mean, that level of impossibility and that level of coincidence are certainly what's prime for what leads to lawsuits and things like that. But of course, on the other side of that, we'd rather there be no lawsuit in the first place and just be more care and attention paid towards whether or not you bring new chemicals to market. And I think instances like this, where you've got something not only deadly, but this deadly and impacts our youth, it's something that only breaks the heart of families, but it's something that's going to hopefully be resolved soon and so we can get to the bottom of it soon, so no one else has to bear the brunt of this pain.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pain that's being bared, and this is Orange County, right? And so
Yeah.
if this happened in Orange County, imagine what's happening in parts of the South, what's happening in other Black and Brown communities across the nation. Speaking of the nation, a lot of people are reeling from their electricity bills. I don't know if y'all have had a chance to take a look at your electricity bill recently, but we know the summertime is always when that electricity bill seems to creep up. But there is something else afoot. There's a story that I want to dig into where basically the Trump administration says that nearly 200 additional companies, utilities, and state governments are now signed on to what's called the Ratepayer Protection Pledge. Big tech promising to cover the cost of powering their AI data centers instead of passing those costs on to your electric bill. Todd, are you buying this ratepayer protection pledge that apparently is non-binding? It sounds real nice on paper, but will it actually keep our bills down? Nobody's promising to write that down. What do you think?
No, I mean, the fact that it's non-binding says everything that needs to be said. I think at the end of the day, this is going to have a lot of indirect costs and indirect surges in terms of requirements of our electrical grid that I know is going to be borne by the community members who are at least able to afford it. I know in places like Georgia, where we have campaigns to address the utility board and have our Lift Every Voice campaign, where we're getting people out to vote to make sure people are voting about small elections just as much as they are at the national elections, for these very reasons, because everything is out of control in terms of cost, deregulation, and the cost of human life, the cost of our communities is too much to bear. So I don't believe the big tech companies, and I don't think anyone else should. If they are to pledge any money, it needs to be something that's legislated, that's something that's codified, something that's has a clear legal hook to it. So if they fail to meet their core duty, anything they tell the general public, there's a real clear legal lever to make sure that's done and restitution is paid.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of pay, I mean, there are a lot of folks that have very strong opinions, Dr. Breaux, about these data centers that are popping up in communities across the country. Beyond electric bills going up, water bills going up. There are a lot of folks who say they're unknowns in terms of the long-term effects of these data centers so close to residential centers and the like. What are you hearing from, some of your peers that are looking at all the different ways in which to, improve quality of life, all the different opportunities to strengthen uh, longevity for all? What are you hearing from your peers when it comes to the advances that we're seeing in tech and the number of these data centers that are popping up in communities across the country?
I think there's a general concern that the technology is going to be concentrated for the privileged few, not only in terms of profit and control, but also who's benefiting from the access to these technologies. Um, the data center question um, doesn't come up so much in mainstream sort of longevity conversations. I've seen and heard some concerns around EMF exposure, just sort of if folks are familiar with sort of electromagnetic frequencies, causing harm to health. This came up. I don't know if folks followed the story around I think the or transmission station near the 49er stadium prior to the Super Bowl, and sort of both blaming that on higher rates of injury for some of the 49ers players this year. So there are some folks in the longevity space concerned and raising the alarms around exposure to EMF, radiation frequencies and so forth. But it's not such a mainstream conversation. It's probably going to increase, in the coming years as these data centers continue to expand.
Todd, what are you hearing? Not just in the civil rights legal community, but what are you hearing, on the ground in places like Chicago, related to the push for more data centers, not less? I don't hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, hold on, have we done a feasibility study? Wait a minute, where's the environmental impact report? Hold on, where's the economic impact report? Before we start breaking ground." Everyone seems to be, in this race to, be the first to put a data center in another community. What are you learning, and what do you want our leaders, learners, and listeners to know the most when it comes to the push for these data centers to go up quick, fast, and in a hurry?
Yeah, these data centers are, bad news in every front. I mean, certainly they bring some jobs in the short term. Certainly they bring some additional conveniences in terms of maybe faster internet service, better access to coming to some of these data mining companies, and the jobs and indirect benefits that you may yield from that from an economic standpoint. But the fact that no communities, no neighborhoods of any affluence want them near them is all the sign you need that they have significant deleterious short and long term impacts on both the environment and the actual health of community members who reside near them. This is just another example of some industrialized effort that's going to hopefully not be on the backs of our community members. I mean, even in the efforts when it's going to be done in rural locations, there's still going to be real harm to communities, to farms, to our rural brothers and sisters who are in those communities. So now the question becomes, there's an inevitability aspect to this. This is going to happen no matter what. What can we do to do it at least as wisely as possible? And the only way to do that is to study, take some time, pull back a little bit, and figure out the best ways to do this in a way that does the least harm and provides the most good for something we know is necessary going forward. And I don't see a lot of effort going towards that particular effort. And that's why in Chicago and other cities, there's a lot of effort on the ground to just hold off on these projects. Not saying put the kibosh on them, not saying never, but at least make sure that there's some proper safeguards in place to protect the community members, ensure that they're done as environmentally friendly and as friendly to the long-term quality of life for community members as possible, rather than just rushing to get things up for development's sake.
Well, we're going to continue to follow this story. We've talked a lot about data centers on this show. We'll continue to talk about data centers. We also talk a lot about longevity on the show, and we will continue to do that, because it is my belief, it is our shared belief that longevity is a justice issue. And we don't talk about it that way nearly enough. But when we come forward, they're going to stick around because there is a nun. There's a nun that you have to know about. This Catholic sister, a couple Catholic sisters actually, are launching a new order. We're going to tell you why when we come forward and get their reaction. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 15.